My name is Rachel Palmer. I'm 37, and just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd been anticipating for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years. But as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to take a breather, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. My mother. She was at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, looking every bit the part of the wealthy socialite she'd always been. For a moment, I thought maybe she wouldn't recognize me, but then her eyes flicked up to the mirror and landed on my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice cool and detached, like we'd just bumped into each other at a country club instead of a bathroom after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. "I could say the same," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved with organizations that support education. And you?" "I'm being honored tonight," I said, meeting her gaze. "For my work and research." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words brought me back to the day I walked out of that house for the last time. I was 19, and the years leading up to that moment hadn't been easy. In high school, I struggled with depression, but in my family, that wasn't something you admitted. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had said once, her voice dripping with irritation when I tried to open up to her. "You have everything. More than most kids your age. You're just making excuses." The truth was, I'd been drowning. The pressure to be perfect, to live up to the Palmer name, was suffocating. I tried to keep up, but my grades started slipping during my junior year, and by senior year, I was barely holding on. My parents didn't see a kid who needed help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. "This family has standards," he had said that night, pacing the living room while I stood there clutching my acceptance letter. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine. But you'll do it on your own." I had been kicked out of the house. I remember the weight of that duffel bag as I left the house that night. It wasn't just filled with clothes. It held the reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even come to the door to say goodbye. My mother stayed seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I didn't exist. My father had disappeared into his study after delivering his ultimatum. I felt invisible, discarded, like I'd never been a part of their world to begin with. For the first few weeks, I stayed with a friend, sleeping on her pull-out couch while I tried to figure out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it felt like the only thing I could control. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent when I finally scraped together enough to move into a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, work, and the overwhelming sense of failure that clung to me like a second skin. But something about being on my own, away from their constant judgment, gave me a flicker of hope. For the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. My first year at community college was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts at the diner. I'd decided to study chemistry, partly because I genuinely enjoyed it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel in something challenging. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre at best, and I felt like I was starting from behind compared to my classmates. But for the first time in years, I wasn't under the crushing weight of their expectations. I could just focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I'd spent weeks preparing, going over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I was terrified to look. But there it was. A 92%. I nearly cried, right there in the middle of the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. It felt like the first small step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I had learned how to work for what I wanted. And the more I gave, the more I saw myself grow. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. I transferred to a 4-year university, and while I still faced obstacles, I had learned how to push through them. The shy, insecure girl who barely got by in high school had become someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, once a challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore. I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I worked part-time, still, but I also started interning at local research labs, gaining experience that eventually led me to an opportunity I never imagined, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit focused on advancing science education. It wasn't just a job. It was my way of giving back, of creating a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a moment of triumph, but when it came time to celebrate, I realized something. My parents hadn't even called. Not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans. Nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, threw extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs. But for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I graduated with honors, after I'd worked my ass off to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge the hard work I'd put in. But they didn't. It was as if I never mattered to them, and that realization hit harder than I cared to admit. The only family member who bothered to show up at my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia. She was my mother's younger sister, the black sheep of the family. Lydia had never cared much for my parents' rigid standards, and while they shunned her for being too eccentric, she was always kind to me. She was the one person who would call on my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, I felt a lump form in my throat. She waved at me excitedly from the back, and after the ceremony, I found her in the parking lot, waiting with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It was a small comfort, but it was something. It wasn't the cold silence I'd gotten from my parents. Aunt Lydia was the one who reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection, that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path they wanted for me. She cared that I had made it on my own, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, I was wrapping up a research project at the university when one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist, the kind who had a passion for the periodic table like it was a work of art. He'd noticed my work ethic, my persistence despite everything I'd been through. "Rachel," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first I thought it was a joke. Oxford? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. He told me that this wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make real contributions to the field, and that I deserved the opportunity. "Don't let fear hold you back, Rachel," he said. "You've proven yourself. Now it's time to take that next step." I applied, hesitantly at first, not fully believing it could happen. The application process was rigorous, and I wasn't sure I'd make the cut. But then, weeks later, I received an email. We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University. I moved to England without telling anyone. Not my parents, not any of my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. I called her a few days before I left, and she was the one who encouraged me to go. You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back, she said. Do this for yourself, Rachel. She understood why I needed to disappear, why I needed to escape the shadows of my past, and carve out a new future without anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked Lydia not to tell anyone else where I'd gone. I didn't want them to try and find me, didn't want the weight of their judgment pulling me back. So, I left, boarding a plane to Oxford, with nothing but a backpack, and the faint hope that this could be my chance to finally become the person I always dreamed of being. I settled into a small flat in Oxford and threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were tough, the language, the culture, the isolation. But the more I immersed myself in my research, the more I felt at home. I was working on projects that mattered, things that could make a real impact on the world. The chemistry I studied was no longer just about passing exams or proving myself to my parents. It was about changing the future. As the years passed, I completed my master's degree, and then, driven by the momentum of my research, I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and there was no turning back. After several years of sleepless nights and endless lab experiments, I earned my PhD, becoming a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. After finishing my PhD, the next step seemed almost too surreal to grasp. I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. It felt like a dream I never dared to chase, not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I never imagined I would be given the chance. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet, the recognition still felt like it was happening to someone else. At Cambridge, I was able to teach and mentor the next generation of students, something I hadn't expected to find so fulfilling. The freedom to shape minds, to pass on the knowledge and passion I'd gained, was beyond anything I could have imagined back when I was struggling through community college. I had gone from being the girl who didn't belong to someone who could stand at the front of a classroom and be taken seriously. But there was still a piece of me that was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, if anyone cared enough to find out. I hadn't heard from my parents since I left. No calls, no letters, no attempts to reach out. I wondered if they even thought about me. As my mother turned back to the mirror, adjusting her lipstick, I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Her words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," echoed in my head, and I couldn't help but wonder if she really believed it. I thought about all those years I spent trying to meet their expectations, all the ways they told me I wasn't good enough. The community college rejection, the years of silence, and the way they acted like I didn't exist once I walked out of their house. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there in that bathroom, the bitterness still stung. I had worked so hard to get to this point, leaving everything behind, moving to England, finishing my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge. And yet, there she was, standing in front of me, acting like my entire journey had been some kind of afterthought. I had gone from being the failure they cast aside to someone who could now speak at international conferences, lead research, and mentor young minds. And for what? To stand here and have her offer me nothing more than a cold acknowledgement? As she left the bathroom, I watched her glide out of the door, back to the people she was comfortable with. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who'd erased every trace of them from my life. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built a life on my own terms, and even though they would never understand, that was enough. The gala ceremony began shortly after my mother disappeared into the crowd. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of that encounter. The clinking of glasses, the hum of polite conversation. It all felt distant now. It was time to take my place, to step into the role I had fought so hard to claim. The stage was set, the lights shining down on the sea of well-dressed guests, and the moment I had been anticipating for months was finally here. I made my way to the front, where they called my name, the words echoing through the room. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening, but it felt strangely hollow, like I was listening to someone else's life unfold. I took the stage, trying to maintain a calm exterior, but inside, all I could think about was the fact that I was standing in front of an audience of people who knew nothing of the path I had taken to get here. No idea what it had cost me to get this far. The spotlight hit me, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. This wasn't just a recognition of my work in chemistry. This was my way of showing the world that I was more than the person my parents had tried to make me believe I was. This was the moment where I stood on my own 2 feet, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I stood there, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the moment, the host's voice rang out, drawing everyone's attention. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement. In recognition of the groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry that will be honored tonight, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a grant of $2 million to the recipient of this award. The room went quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me. My heart raced. This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the continued efforts of the recipients' research and further their impact on the world of education. I blinked, momentarily stunned. $2 million. The number hung in the air, surreal and overwhelming. But the announcement wasn't directly for me. It was for the recipient of the award, someone whose name hadn't been revealed yet. I was still processing everything when I heard the host's voice continue. This grant, though anonymous, will be bestowed upon the person tonight who has demonstrated exceptional dedication to their work in advancing chemistry and education. For a moment, I didn't know what to think. The enormity of the sum, the way it would change someone's life, was astounding. But there was something else in the air, something I couldn't shake. The realization that the donor didn't know it would be me. They didn't know I was the one being honored tonight. As the announcement echoed through the room, my eyes wandered across the crowd, trying to catch a glimpse of the people around me. But then, something caught my attention. A subtle shift in the crowd. Near the back, just beside the exit, I saw him. My father. He stood up abruptly, his face twisted in disgust. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, before he turned sharply and began to make his way toward the door. His movements were swift and deliberate, as if he couldn't get out of that room fast enough. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man who had rejected me all those years ago, the one who had kicked me out of his house, was leaving as soon as he heard the news of the grant. He didn't even stay to see who was being recognized for the award. My chest tightened as a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger, disbelief, and something darker, more bitter. This was the moment I had been waiting for. A moment where everything I had worked for was finally being acknowledged, and he couldn't even bring himself to stay in the room to witness it. He couldn't stomach the fact that the daughter he had written off was now standing at the front of the room, receiving everything he had always expected from someone else. As my father made his way toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The strange weight of his sudden departure settled over me, but before I could process it, the announcer's voice sliced through the room again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host continued, "we are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. The $2 million grant which will be awarded to the recipient of this honor, has been made possible through the contributions of Mosaic Fertilizers, a company led by one of the most influential figures in the fertilizer industry. Mosaic Fertilizers. My father's company. I froze. The donor, the one whose generosity had made this award possible, was my father's company. My chest tightened as the truth hit me. The man who had spent years treating me like an embarrassment, the one who had walked out of the room when he learned of my success, was the one funding this recognition. The irony stung deeply. The same man who rejected my path, who disowned me for pursuing a life that didn't fit into his perfect image, had unknowingly backed the very award that would be the crowning achievement of my career. It was almost too much to process, too much to bear in that moment. I stood there stunned as the announcer's words continued to echo in my ears. The applause around me felt distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. The weight of the grant, of everything that had just been revealed, hung heavily on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment I couldn't process any of it. "Thank you," I managed to say into the microphone, my voice shaky but steady enough. The words felt hollow, too small for what I was feeling, but I didn't have time to think about it. I had to get out of that room. I couldn't stand there another second, basking in the recognition that felt so empty. I turned abruptly, walked off the stage, and without another glance at the audience, I bolted for the back door. My steps quickened as I made my way through the hallway, heart racing, only one thought running through my mind. My father. I knew he'd left the room. I saw him walk out, his face a mixture of disgust and something else I couldn't quite read. But he couldn't just leave. Not like this. Not when everything had come full circle. I couldn't let it end like this, with him walking out on the one moment that proved everything he had tried to dismiss about me. I pushed through the door leading outside, scanning the area, my breath coming in quick bursts. There he was, standing by his car, his back to me. My feet moved on their own, and before I could stop myself, I was running. "Dad!" I called out, my voice almost cracking as I rushed after him. He didn't look back at first, his shoulders stiff, but when he finally turned around, I saw the bitter expression on his face. He had that same look I remembered from all those years ago, like everything was an insult to him. "What is it now, Rachel?" he asked sharply, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think I'm going to congratulate you?" I stopped just a few feet away, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew what this was about. He had no idea who the recipient of the grant was until they called my name. Until that moment, he thought he was just funding some good cause, sending money to the foundation, believing it was going to some worthy academic or researcher he could proudly point to. He didn't know it would be me standing there on that stage. He sneered, his lips curling into a bitter smile. I don't know whether to be disgusted or impressed, but here you are, taking my money. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, right? I could see the resentment in his eyes. The grant, $2 million, had come from Mosaic Fertilizers, his company. But once the money was donated to the foundation, it was entirely out of his control. They had chosen who would receive it, and they chose me. The irony hit me like a wave. "I didn't ask for this," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rush of emotions. "I never asked for your money or your approval. I earned this on my own, just like everything else." His eyes darkened and he shook his head. "It doesn't change anything. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house all those years ago. No grant or award is going to change that." I felt a rush of anger, but I pushed it down. "It doesn't matter what you think anymore. I've made my own life. And if that money came from you, it doesn't mean anything to me." I turned my back on him without saying another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to argue with him anymore. He wouldn't understand, and truthfully, I didn't need his approval. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to him. And for what? To be here, at this moment, with everything I had worked for, only for him to stand there bitter and resentful of my success? It wasn't worth my time. The next day, I made a decision. I had spent the night thinking about what the $2 million grant meant. At first, it had felt like a victory, a vindication. But by morning, that feeling had faded. It wasn't my victory. It was just another reminder of everything I had escaped. The money, tied to his company, was never going to erase the years of pain and rejection. It wasn't going to heal the part of me that he had broken when he kicked me out of the house all those years ago. So, I donated the entire sum, every last cent of it. I didn't want it. Not from him, not with the strings that came attached to it. Instead, I directed it toward funding scholarships for underprivileged students who had been overlooked, underestimated, and written off. I wanted to give them the chance to build something for themselves, without being crushed under the weight of expectations that didn't belong to them. The money that had once been tied to rejection and bitterness was now part of something greater, something that would outlast the sting of my father's judgment. I felt a quiet satisfaction as I pressed the donation button. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need his money, his approval, or his recognition. I had built my own legacy, one that would live on far beyond the walls of that gala. $200,000 for one night, he said. I couldn't believe it. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, clutching the towel wrapped around me like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My stepdad, Adam, was standing a few feet away from me in the hallway, his eyes locking onto mine with this disgusting mix of confidence and desperation. It was like he had rehearsed this moment. I was too shocked to speak at first, but when I did, it came out as a yell, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and pure disgust. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I screamed, backing away as fast as I could. "My name's Michelle. I'm 33 now, married, with 2 kids, and thankfully a far cry from the version of myself that was standing there in that hallway. At the time, I was 25, fresh out of college, and drowning in debt from student loans. I was working as an assistant professor at a community college, trying to make a name for myself, while scraping by on barely enough to pay my bills. My dad had moved to a different country when I was a teenager and had basically disappeared from our lives. My mom, Julia, had married Adam when I was 20, and let's just say, he wasn't the kind of person I'd have ever willingly chosen to have in my life. But my mom adored him, or at least she pretended to. He was 45 years old, wealthy, and provided her with everything she wanted. My mom was a bit older than him. It all started that afternoon. I was spending the weekend at my mom's house, something I rarely did because honestly, being around her wasn't easy. My mom, Julia, and I never had a great relationship, especially after my twin sister died when we were kids. But with money being so tight, I figured staying with her for a couple of days would save me the cost of groceries, and maybe we could actually have a decent conversation for once. That day, I'd gone out for a jog. It was brutally hot, and by the time I got back, I was drenched in sweat. I saw a note on the kitchen counter saying that my mom was out visiting a friend and Adam had gone grocery shopping. Perfect. I thought I had the place to myself for a little bit, so I headed straight for the shower, not even bothering to grab clothes since I figured no one would be back for a couple of hours. After my shower, I wrapped myself in a towel and headed toward the bedroom where I'd left my clothes. It didn't even cross my mind that someone might have come back early. I mean, why would it? But as soon as I turned the corner, there he was, Adam, standing at the end of the hallway. My heart dropped. He wasn't supposed to be there, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't normal. At first, I thought maybe I'd startled him, or maybe he'd startled me. But then he smiled. Not a friendly stepdad kind of smile. This was something else entirely. Before I could say anything, he stepped closer. Too close. "You're beautiful, you know that," he said, his voice low, like he was testing the waters. I froze, not sure what to do or say. My brain was screaming at me to move, to get out of there, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Then he said it. The offer that made my stomach turn. $200,000 for one night, he said, like he was offering me a business deal. His tone was calm, almost casual, like this was something normal to say to your stepdaughter. That's when it hit me. He wasn't joking. He meant it. Every disgusting word. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind was racing, but I couldn't form a single coherent thought. "What the hell did you just say?" I managed to choke out. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was shaky, almost a whisper. Adam didn't flinch. He just kept looking at me with that disgusting smirk. "You heard me," he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Think about it, Michelle. 200 grand. You could pay off your loans, start fresh. No one would have to know." That's when the anger kicked in, boiling up so fast I could feel my hands trembling. "Are you insane?" I yelled, backing away from him. "What kind of person do you think I am?" He didn't move, didn't even look embarrassed. If anything, he seemed annoyed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Calm down," he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "It's just an offer. You don't have to make a big deal out of it." A big deal? He was standing there trying to buy me and he had the audacity to tell me to calm down? My whole body was shaking and I couldn't even look at him anymore. I turned and ran straight into my room, slamming the door behind me and locking it. Once the door was locked, I pressed my back against it, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I felt trapped, not just in the room, but in the whole situation. What was I supposed to do? I wanted to scream, cry, throw something. But most of all, I wanted to be anywhere but there. The worst part was knowing I had no one to call. My mom? She'd never believe me. She never believed me about anything important. And this? She'd probably twist it into being my fault somehow, like she always did. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, trying to figure out what to do. Minutes dragged by, each one stretching out endlessly as I sat there in silence. Through the thin walls, I could hear the low murmur of the TV. Adam had made himself comfortable in the living room, as if nothing had happened. The audacity of it made me feel sick. Then finally the sound of the front door opening broke the tension. I heard my mom's voice, light and casual, like it was just another normal evening. For a moment, relief washed over me. She was home. But almost instantly, a wave of dread followed. What was I supposed to say? Would she even listen? My hands were clammy as I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. There she was, setting her purse down on the counter while Adam leaned back on the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned, but I swallowed hard and found my voice. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Alone." She turned to look at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone more impatient than concerned. My eyes flicked to Adam, who was watching us like this was some kind of show. I hated how calm he looked, like he already knew how this would play out. I gestured toward the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we just talk in private?" My mom sighed but followed me into the kitchen. I could feel my hands trembling as I leaned against the counter, trying to find the right words. "Mom," I started, my voice cracking. Adam said something to me. Something disgusting. Her face shifted, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of concern, there was annoyance. "What are you talking about?" she asked sharply. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to step off a cliff. He offered me money, $200,000, to sleep with him. The words felt like acid coming out of my mouth. I expected shock, anger, something. But what I got instead made my heart drop. Her expression hardened, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, Michelle, don't be ridiculous." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "I'm not lying," I said, my voice rising. He said it. Not long ago, in the hallway. But she wasn't listening. She was already shaking her head, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're unbelievable," she said. "I should have known you'd pull something like this. Always looking for attention, always trying to cause problems." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother dismissing me like I was some troublemaker making up lies. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. "I'm not lying," I repeated, louder this time, my voice shaking. She raised a hand to stop me, her expression cold and detached. "Enough, Michelle. Let's see what Adam has to say about this." She stormed back into the living room and I followed, my heart pounding. Adam looked up from the couch as if we'd just interrupted his quiet evening. "Adam," my mom said sharply, her voice edged with anger. "Michelle just told me you said something completely inappropriate to her. She's claiming you offered her money for—" She hesitated, glancing at me with an icy glare. "For you know what?" She made a suggestive face, kind of embarrassed to say the words. Adam leaned back slightly, his expression shifting into one of exaggerated concern, like he was the one being wronged. "Julia, I don't know how to say this, but it's the opposite of what she's claiming," he said, shaking his head as if the mere suggestion was preposterous. "She came out of the bathroom in just a towel and, well, it felt like she was trying to get my attention." He glanced at me with a look of fake pity. "I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to upset you, but she's twisting the whole thing around now." My jaw dropped. "What?" I shouted, my voice breaking as I took a step forward. "That's not what happened, and you know it." But Adam kept his composure, holding his hands up in mock defense. "I swear, Julia, I was going to let it go because I didn't think it was worth causing trouble. But I can't just sit here and let her make these accusations." He sounded calm, even reasonable, and that made my blood boil. I turned to my mom, desperate for her to see through his lies, but the look on her face made my stomach sink. She wasn't looking at him. She was glaring at me. My mom didn't say anything at first, but her glare said it all. She believed him. Of course, she did. "Unbelievable," she muttered, shaking her head. "You come into my house, and this is how you act? How dare you, Michelle?" Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush hot, my body trembling with frustration and anger. "You're seriously taking his side?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "He's lying, Mom. He's lying to your face." But she wasn't listening. She turned to Adam and placed a hand on his shoulder like he was the victim. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with this," she said, her tone dripping with sympathy. That was it. I couldn't take another second in that house. I turned and stormed toward the door, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag. "You know what? Forget it," I said, my voice trembling. "Believe whatever you want, but I'm done." I didn't wait for her to respond. I just walked away, tears blurring my vision as I picked up what I had brought, walked towards the front door. I could barely breathe, the weight of betrayal and anger pressing down on my chest. As I reached the front door, I heard her voice behind me, cold and sharp. "I didn't expect much from you, Michelle, but I never thought you were a—" She started, but she couldn't finish the word. I spun around, my hand still gripping the door handle. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low but shaking with anger. My eyes burned as I stared at her, feeling every ounce of the hurt and betrayal welling up inside me. "You want to believe him? Fine. But don't you ever call me that." She stood there, her arms crossed, her face hard, and for a second, I thought she might actually say it. But she didn't. Instead, she just turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing. I opened the door, stepped outside, and slammed it behind me as hard as I could. I could feel the tears starting to fall again, but I refused to let her see them. Not her, not Adam, not anyone in that house. I practically ran to my car, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and climbed in, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, the streets blurring through my tears. The anger and humiliation were too much to hold back. Finally, I pulled over to the side of the road, parked the car, and let it all out. My hands gripped the steering wheel as sobs racked my body, the weight of everything crashing down on me. After a while, I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to steady my breathing, but the knot in my chest wouldn't go away. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, but I didn't know who to call. My mom was out of the question, and there was no way I'd go to anyone who might twist this into gossip. Then I thought of John. He was just a good friend back then, someone I trusted. I hesitated for a moment, feeling embarrassed about what had happened, but I needed to get it out of me before it consumed me. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered, his voice calm and familiar. "Michelle? Everything okay?" he asked, immediately sensing something was off. That was all it took for the tears to start again. "John?" I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to someone. Can I just tell you what happened?" I braced myself for his reaction, not knowing if he'd judge me or think I was overreacting. But I didn't care. I just needed to let it out. John and I weren't anything more than friends back then. Good friends, but nothing romantic. We'd met at the community college where I worked. He was one of those people who always seemed easy to talk to, the kind of guy who'd crack a joke at the right moment to lighten the mood or offer a listening ear when you needed one. Over the months, we'd grabbed coffee a few times, and I always felt comfortable around him. He never pushed, never judged. Just a good, solid friend. That's why, even though I felt humiliated and raw, I dialed his number. He was one of the few people I trusted to listen without twisting things around or making me feel worse. As the phone rang, part of me worried I was dumping too much on him, but the moment he answered, I knew I'd made the right choice. His voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos I was feeling. "Hey, Michelle," he said. "What's going on? You sound upset." John suggested we meet at a park nearby. I think he could tell from my voice that I needed to get out, to talk face to face with someone who wouldn't make me feel small. I drove there, still trying to collect myself, though my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. When I arrived, I spotted him sitting on a bench under one of the big oak trees, his usual easygoing expression replaced by one of quiet concern. As I approached, he stood up and gave me a small smile. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "You okay?" I shook my head, biting my lip to keep from breaking down again. We sat on the bench, and for a moment I just stared at the ground, trying to find the words. Finally, I took a deep breath and told him everything. About Adam, his disgusting offer, and how my mom not only didn't believe me, but turned it all around on me. As the words spilled out, I felt a mix of anger and relief, like I was finally letting go of a weight I'd been carrying all night. When I finished, I looked up at John, half expecting him to have the same doubtful expression my mom had given me. Instead, his face was filled with quiet anger. Not at me, but at the situation, at Adam. "Michelle," he said firmly, his voice steady, "I believe you. Every word." Hearing those words felt like the ground beneath me had finally steadied, even if just for a moment. I let out a shaky breath, and tears welled up again, not from sadness this time, but from relief. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. What he did. It's disgusting. And your mom? She should have had your back, no question." His words felt like a balm on an open wound. For the first time all day, I didn't feel completely alone. And I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but everything came pouring out before I could stop it. "You know, it's not just this," I said, my voice trembling. "My mom, she's always been cold with me, ever since Lily." I paused, swallowing hard. "Ever since my sister died. I was 7 and we were at the playground. She chased after a ball, ran into the street and..." My words trailed off as the memory hit me like a wave. The screech of tires, the screams, it all came rushing back. John didn't say anything, just nodded, letting me get it out. It was an accident, I continued, my voice cracking. But it's like my mom never saw it that way. After that day, everything changed. She stopped looking at me the same, stopped hugging me, she just shut me out. And now, tonight, it's like she's blaming me all over again, like I'm the bad one, like I did something wrong. I don't know why I even thought she'd believe me. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by how much I was unraveling. The next few days were a blur of anger, hurt, and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake Adam's smug expression, the way he twisted everything to make me look like the villain. And my mom. The way she defended him without hesitation cut deeper than I expected. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let him get away with it. Not when I knew the truth. I needed proof. Something my mom couldn't deny. Something that would finally force her to see him for what he was. The idea hit me one night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. My phone. I could use my phone to record him. It was simple, and I always had it on me. The thought made my pulse quicken. If I could get Adam to repeat what he said, or even hint at it, I'd finally have proof. Something my mom couldn't brush off or twist against me. I decided the best way to catch Adam off guard was to play along, to make him think I was reconsidering everything. It made my stomach turn just thinking about it, but I knew this was the only way to get him to admit the truth. That evening I called him, keeping my voice steady, as if I was genuinely conflicted. Adam, I've been thinking about what happened the other day, I said, forcing a hesitant tone. Maybe we should meet somewhere quiet to talk. I feel like maybe we misunderstood each other. There was a pause on the other end, and I held my breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he said, "Well, I'm glad you're being reasonable about it, Michelle. Where do you want to meet?" His voice had that same smug undertone that made my skin crawl, but I stayed calm. "There's a park nearby," I suggested. "It's quiet, and we won't be interrupted." He agreed without hesitation, and I hung up, immediately opening the voice recorder app on my phone. I rehearsed what I'd say, trying to keep the anger in check. This was my chance to expose him, and I wasn't going to mess it up. As soon as I saw Adam walking toward the bench where I was waiting, I discreetly started the recording app on my phone, keeping it hidden in my jacket pocket. My hands were clammy, but I reminded myself to stay calm. I had to make this believable. I stood up as he approached, forcing a small, nervous smile. "Hey, Adam," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Thanks for meeting me. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I wanted to apologize if I misunderstood anything." He smiled, that same irritatingly smug expression he always wore when he thought he was in control. "I appreciate that, Michelle," he said, sitting down on the bench beside me. "I knew you'd come around eventually. Sometimes emotions get the better of us, you know?" I nodded, pretending to agree. "Yeah, maybe I overreacted. I mean, I was shocked, and I probably didn't handle things the way I should have." I paused, glancing at him. I need to understand. What did you mean when you said what you said? About the money?" His expression shifted slightly, like he was weighing how much to say. "Look," he began, leaning forward. "I only brought it up because I thought we had a certain understanding. You're a smart, beautiful woman, Michelle. I thought maybe you'd see the opportunity for what it was." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "But $200,000? That's a lot of money, Adam. Why would you even offer something like that? What were you expecting from me?" He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "I wasn't expecting anything, really. I was just testing the waters, seeing if maybe you'd consider it. I mean, you're struggling, right? I thought it might help us both." I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my face neutral. "Help us both how?" I pressed, my voice quiet but steady. He smirked, leaning back on the bench. "Let's not play games, Michelle. You know exactly what I meant. I didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of it. It's not like anyone else had to know. I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang for a moment before speaking again. So, you were serious? About the 200,000? He shrugged casually. Of course I was. I don't say things I don't mean, Michelle. I figured you'd appreciate the gesture. Every word he said made my blood boil, but I stayed calm, knowing the recorder was picking up everything. I glanced at him one last time, my voice soft but firm. Thanks for clearing that up, Adam. I needed to hear it from you. I forced myself to smile faintly, looking down at my hands as if I was embarrassed. I mean, you're not wrong, Adam, I said hesitantly, my voice low. I am struggling. Money's been tight, and with my loans, I've felt like I'm drowning most days. I glanced at him, catching the faint glimmer of excitement in his eyes as he shifted slightly closer. You don't have to feel bad about that, he said, his tone softening in a way that almost sounded comforting, but I knew better. You're a smart girl, Michelle. You've got options, and I'm offering you something that could change your life. It's not just about the money. It's about making things easier for both of us. I nodded slowly, pretending to mull it over. It's just, I don't know. I've never thought about anything like this before. I mean, it's not like you're unattractive or anything, I added, forcing a nervous laugh as if I were embarrassed to admit it. You're actually pretty good looking, Adam. His smile widened, and he sat up straighter, clearly encouraged. Well, thank you, he said, his voice taking on a more confident tone. See? It doesn't have to be awkward. I knew you'd understand eventually. This could be something good for both of us, Michelle. You just have to let yourself see it that way. I glanced at him again, feigning uncertainty. Maybe you're right. I just need some time to think about it, I said, standing up slowly. Can I let you know in a couple of days? I just need to wrap my head around everything. Of course, he said, smiling broadly now. Take all the time you need. I'm glad we could talk this through. I nodded, offering him a weak smile before turning and walking away, my phone still recording in my pocket. My hands were trembling, but not from nervousness anymore. I had him. Every disgusting word was captured, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. 2 days later, I called Adam. My stomach churned as I dialed his number, but I reminded myself that this was all part of the plan. He picked up on the second ring, sounding eager like he'd been waiting for this call. Michelle? He said smoothly. I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had time to think? I hesitated for effect, then replied, Yeah, I've been thinking. I'm ready to talk more about it. But I'd like to meet somewhere private, you know? Somewhere out of the way. I heard the excitement in his voice as he responded. Of course. Tell me where and when. I had already decided on the location. A fancy hotel downtown that Adam and my mom like to brag about. The Grand Regent, I said. Let's meet in the lobby tonight around 8. We can figure out the details there. He didn't hesitate, agreeing immediately. Perfect, he said. I'll see you tonight. When I hung up, I sat back and took a deep breath. Everything was in place. My phone was fully charged and I'd already set up the recorder app to start with one tap. Tonight, Adam would think he'd won, but this time I wasn't walking away empty-handed. At 7:50, I called Adam, keeping my voice calm but a little rushed. Hey, I'm running a bit late, I told him. Traffic's a nightmare. Why don't you go ahead and wait for me in a suite? I'll meet you there as soon as I can. He didn't hesitate, clearly eager. No problem, Michelle. I'll let the reception staff know about you. After hanging up, I drove straight to my mom's house, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When she opened the door, her face immediately twisted with suspicion. What do you want? She asked, her tone sharp. I didn't waste time. Mom, you're coming with me, I said firmly. She started to argue, but I cut her off, my voice steady but full of emotion. If you don't come with me right now, I swear you'll never see me again. Not a call, not a visit, nothing. This is your one chance. Her eyes widened, and after a tense moment she grabbed her purse and followed me to the car. When we arrived at the hotel, my heart was pounding, but I kept my composure. My mom sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, not saying a word. I parked the car and led her through the grand entrance of the hotel. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, the kind of luxury Adam and my mom loved to flaunt. I walked straight to the reception desk, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Hi, someone's waiting for me, but I don't know the room number. They said I should give you my name here." I told the receptionist my name. She nodded, typing quickly on her computer before picking up the phone to confirm. "Yes, room 704, 7th floor." I turned to my mom, holding out the card. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady. She didn't respond but followed me into the elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity. When we reached the room, I took a deep breath before sliding the card into the door. The lock clicked and I pushed it open. Adam was sitting in an armchair, looking far too comfortable. He looked up, expecting me to be alone, but his expression quickly changed when he saw my mom standing behind me. His smile faltered, and he shot up from the chair. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual, his confidence suddenly wavering. I stepped into the room, my mom trailing behind me. Adam's face was a mix of confusion and panic as he glanced between us. "What's going on, Michelle?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, but the cracks were already showing. I pulled out my phone, holding it tightly in my hand. "I thought it was time we cleared up that little misunderstanding, Adam," I said, my voice cold. "You remember, don't you? The conversation we had at the park 2 days ago?" His eyes darted to my mom, then back to me. "Michelle, I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly, his usual smugness replaced by a nervous edge. "I think you're making a big mistake here." I smiled faintly, my hand trembling slightly as I tapped the play button on my phone. His voice filled the room, crystal clear. Every disgusting word he'd said at the park played back, his offers, his excuses, and, worst of all, his casual admission that he meant every word. My mom's face paled as the recording continued. She froze, her eyes wide as she stared at Adam. When the recording finished, I turned to my mom, my voice steady but full of emotion. "That's the man you defended, the one you chose to believe over me. Now tell me, Mom, am I still the liar here?" Adam started stammering, his face red with panic. "Julia, you know this is all being twisted. She set me up," he blurted, his voice rising in desperation. "You can't believe this. She's just trying to turn you against me." But my mom didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on me, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "Is this real, Michelle?" Her voice was barely audible, but there was no mistaking the crack in it. My mom and I didn't talk much on the drive home, but something shifted. For the first time in my life, I felt like she truly saw me. A week later, she filed for divorce, and Adam was out of our lives for good. She never saw him again, and neither did I. In the weeks that followed, my mom and I started talking more, and slowly, our relationship began to heal. She apologized, truly apologized, for not believing me, and for the way she had treated me over the years. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just the shadow of the daughter she'd lost. I was her daughter too, and she wanted me in her life. Looking back, that night changed everything. It forced me to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. It was hard, painful, and messy, but it also gave me my voice and my life back. My mom treats me with respect now, and though we'll never be perfect, we found a way to move forward. As for me, going through all of that brought me closer to John. He was there for me through every step, checking in, supporting me, and never once doubting me. What started as a friendship grew into something more over time. By the time I turned 30, we were married, and now with Bobby and Emma, I have the family I always dreamed of. A family built on trust and love, something I once thought I'd never have. It's been months since my mom Angel passed away, but some days it feels like the weight of it still crushes me. I loved her deeply, even though life had a way of putting me in the background while my sister Margaret took center stage. My name is Rebecca, 27 years old, a painter who scrapes by with small commissions. I'm not the kind of person who craves attention, but sometimes I wonder if that's why Mom always seemed to gravitate toward Margaret instead of me. Margaret seemed to have everything: a husband, a nice house, and the luxury of never having to take responsibility for anything. Mom adored her, always defending her no matter what. Meanwhile, I was the one making sure things didn't completely fall apart. "Why are you always so dramatic, Rebecca?" Margaret scoffed one day as I helped Mom pack her things to move into the small house on Margaret's property. She was feeling sick lately, and we thought it would be better if she lived closer to one of us. "It's not like I'm doing nothing. I'm giving her a roof over her head, aren't I?" I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "She's not some stranger, Margaret. She's our mom. And that roof is a guest house you haven't used in years. Also, she's paying rent. You're not giving her anything." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "Do you know how many people would kill for a setup like this? She's lucky to have me." "Lucky?" The word came out like a laugh, bitter and sharp. "You mean lucky that I'm here handling everything while you take the credit?" Margaret just shrugged and walked off toward her house, leaving me standing there with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was always like this, her doing the bare minimum and acting like she was a saint for it. Later that evening we got the results. I called Margaret to fill her in. "Margaret, it's bad," I said, my voice trembling. "It's lymphoma. The doctor said 6 months to a year." There was a pause on the other end before she finally responded, her tone annoyingly flat. "Well, that sucks, but at least she has her little house here. That's something, right?" I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "That's all you have to say? That sucks?" "She's dying, Margaret. Dying." "What do you want me to do, Rebecca?" She snapped. "Drop everything and become her private nurse? I have a life too, you know." "You could start by showing some basic compassion," I shot back. "Maybe take her to a doctor's appointment once in a while or spend some actual time with her." She sighed loudly. "Look, I'm doing what I can. Let's not make this about you, okay?" I hung up after that. There was no point in arguing. Margaret would always find a way to turn things around and make herself the victim. After Mom got sick and started treatment, she became too weak and tired to manage her personal finances. Since I was the one taking care of her day-to-day needs, Margaret had taken over handling her bank account and bills. I didn't love the idea, but Mom trusted Margaret, so I let it go. I thought, maybe for once, Margaret would step up and actually do the right thing. One day, Mom asked me to check her bank account balance for her. She'd been worried about some upcoming expenses and wanted to be sure she had enough. "Rebecca, could you stop by the bank for me?" she asked, her voice frail but warm. "I just want to make sure everything's in order." "Of course, Mom," I said, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I'll handle it." I went to the bank that afternoon, still thinking everything would be fine. But when the teller handed me the account summary, my heart dropped. Her account was almost empty. The savings she had worked so hard to build after selling her car, gone. And then I saw it, one massive withdrawal made a few weeks earlier. The name on the transaction hit me like a punch to the gut: Margaret Bennett. I stared at the slip of paper, my hands trembling. There had to be some mistake. Margaret wouldn't. No, she couldn't. But the evidence was right in front of me. I stepped outside the bank, the cold air hitting my face like a slap, and I called Margaret immediately. "What's up?" she answered casually, as if we hadn't been through months of hell. "Are you serious?" I said, my voice shaking. "Margaret, why the hell did you withdraw all of Mom's money?" There was a pause before she answered, her tone defensive. "Rebecca, calm down. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I snapped. "Her account is empty, Margaret, empty. And there's a transaction for the full amount, with your name on it." She sighed, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. It's a loan, okay? I needed the money for some unexpected repairs. I was going to put it back in a few months. Mom doesn't even know. It's not like she needs it right now. A loan? I almost laughed, the bitterness choking in my throat. You think you can just borrow every last penny she has without asking her? Without telling anyone? She's sick, Margaret. That money wasn't yours to take. Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca, she said, her voice sharp now. I'll pay it back. I always planned to. You're blowing this way out of proportion. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice low and shaking. Mom is dying and you think this is about me being dramatic? You're disgusting, Margaret. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my voice. You have no idea what this has done, do you? Mom asked me to check because she was worried about paying for her groceries, Margaret. Groceries. Do you understand how humiliating it's going to be for her if she finds out? She won't find out, Margaret snapped, because you're not going to tell her. My stomach twisted at the sheer audacity of her tone. Why the hell wouldn't I? She deserves to know what you've done. Because it'll only stress her out. Margaret cut me off, her voice sharp and condescending. Do you really think she needs that right now? She's already dealing with enough. Besides, I'll put the money back before she even notices. You're always acting like I'm the bad guy here, Rebecca. But I'm trying to handle everything the best I can. Handle everything? I practically shouted, the anger boiling over. You mean dumping all the hard parts on me while you play the perfect daughter? Don't you dare act like you're the one making sacrifices. Rebecca, she hissed, her voice dropping. If you care about Mom, you'll let this go. She doesn't need to know about this. And you, stop trying to make me the villain just because you can't stand that she trusted me with her finances. I hung up, unable to listen to another word. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding as I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the cars passing by. Margaret was trying to spin this into something noble, as if she was doing Mom some kind of favor by stealing from her. But what could I do? Telling Mom would break her heart, and the thought of adding to her pain made me feel sick. I needed to talk to someone, to vent, to make sense of the storm brewing in my head. Without thinking twice, I called my best friend Laura. She picked up on the second ring. Hey Rebecca, how are you? She asked, her voice warm but slightly concerned. She could always tell when something was wrong. It's Margaret, I said, my voice cracking. I told her everything, the bank account, the withdrawal, the pathetic excuse Margaret had given me. By the time I finished, I could hear Laura's breathing had quickened. She took everything? Laura asked, disbelief dripping from her voice. And she expects you to just keep quiet about it? She said it's a loan, I said bitterly, pacing my small living room. She's acting like she's doing Mom a favor by not telling her. Laura didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was low and firm. Rebecca, you can't let her get away with this. What if she doesn't pay it back? Your mom needs that money. She's depending on you. I know, I said, running a hand through my hair. But if I tell Mom, it'll crush her, and Margaret knows that. She's using it against me. Of course she is, Laura said sharply. She knows you're too kind to blow this up, and she's taking advantage of that. But Rebecca, someone has to hold her accountable. I sighed heavily, sinking into the couch. I don't even know how. Margaret doesn't listen to me. She never has. And George, her husband, always so full of himself. I stopped myself, but Laura jumped in. George knows about this, doesn't he? She asked. He has to. Probably, I admitted. He's just as bad as she is, always backing her up no matter what. You should have seen how smug they were when Mom moved into that guest house. Like they were saints for letting her live there. You're not alone in this, Laura said gently. I'll help however I can. But Rebecca, you need to stand your ground. Her words gave me a small flicker of strength, but I still felt trapped. I couldn't tell Mom. I couldn't confront Margaret without it escalating into a full-blown war. But I couldn't just sit there and let her walk all over us. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't get the thought of Margaret's betrayal out of my head. Every time I saw Mom, it was like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. She'd smile at me, thank me for helping her with dinner or sitting with her during treatments, completely unaware of what Margaret had done. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Every time I opened my mouth, the words got stuck in my throat. But Margaret didn't make it easy to let things go. A few days later, I was at Mom's house, helping her organize her medical bills, when Margaret strolled in like she owned the place. George was with her, carrying a few grocery bags that he plopped on the counter without so much as a word to either of us. "Look at this," Margaret said, holding up a small bouquet of flowers she'd clearly just picked up from the store. "I thought these might brighten up the place. Don't you think, Mom?" "Oh, Margaret, that's so thoughtful," Mom said, her face lighting up. I bit my tongue so hard I thought I might draw blood. "Thoughtful?" "She emptied your bank account, Mom." But instead, I just nodded stiffly, pretending to focus on the papers in front of me. George caught my expression and smirked. "You should learn a thing or two from Margaret, Rebecca. She's always thinking of others." It was the last straw. I slammed the papers down on the table and stood up. "Thinking of others? Are you serious?" My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "Rebecca," Mom said softly, looking startled. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I muttered, forcing myself to calm down. "I just remembered something I need to take care of." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, unable to stay in the same room as Margaret and George for another second. As I walked out, I heard Margaret's voice behind me, low and mocking. "She's always so dramatic." The next day, I needed to clear my head, so I decided to run a few errands in town. I was walking down Main Street, juggling a grocery list in my head, when I saw her. Margaret, stepping out of one of the fanciest boutiques in town, laughing and chatting with a sales assistant as George held the door open for her. She had at least 3 shopping bags in her hands, each with the store's logo plastered all over them. I froze mid-step, my stomach churning. There she was, spending God knows how much money on clothes and who knows what else, while Mom was budgeting for groceries. The image of Margaret's name on that withdrawal flashed in my mind, and my hands clenched into fists. Without thinking, I marched straight up to her. "Margaret," I called, my voice sharp and loud enough to make her flinch. She turned, her smile fading as she saw me. "Oh, Rebecca," she said, her tone saccharine and fake. "What a surprise! Out shopping too." "Shopping?" I hissed, glaring at the bags in her hands. "What are you even doing here? Spending more of Mom's money?" Her face tightened, but she quickly recovered, flashing a tight smile. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my money. George and I work hard, Rebecca. Not that you'd understand." George snorted beside her, clearly amused by her jab. "Careful, Rebecca," he said smugly. "Jealousy doesn't suit you." "Jealous?" I laughed bitterly. "No, Margaret, I'm not jealous, I'm disgusted. You drained Mom's account, and now you're out here buying designer clothes like nothing happened. How do you sleep at night?" Margaret's expression hardened. She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "I told you it's a loan. And if you care about Mom, you'll drop it. Do you want her to know about this? To worry about something she doesn't need to?" I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. "You're unbelievable. Mom deserves to know the truth. She deserves better than you." Margaret leaned in closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You tell her and you'll break her heart. She's already sick, Rebecca. Do you really want to be the reason she gets worse? Think about that before you open your mouth." As I stood there fuming at Margaret's audacity, a wave of memories hit me. This wasn't the first time Margaret had pulled something like this, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last. Mom, bless her sweet heart, had always been Margaret's biggest defender, no matter how awful her behavior was. When we were kids, Margaret had a knack for pushing every limit. She'd borrow money from Mom's purse for things she needed, like concert tickets or new shoes. Mom would find out eventually, of course, but she'd just shake her head and say, "Oh, Margaret, you should have just asked." And that was it. No punishment, no accountability, just forgiveness on a silver platter. Even as we got older, nothing changed. Margaret always had an excuse, always a sob story to back her actions. There was the time she borrowed Mom's car without permission and wrecked it. She cried and blamed a pothole, and somehow Mom ended up comforting her, saying, "Cars can be fixed, but you can't replace family." I remember sitting there stunned while Margaret smiled through her crocodile tears. Mom had a heart too big for her own good. She always believed the best in people, especially in Margaret. "She's your sister, Rebecca," Mom would say whenever I tried to bring up Margaret's behavior. "She's not perfect, but she means well." I hated that phrase. She means well. It was Mom's way of justifying everything Margaret did, from lying to taking advantage of her kindness. But this time was different. This wasn't a harmless mistake or a moment of bad judgment. This was calculated, cruel, and completely unforgivable. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that, if Mom knew, she'd find a way to forgive her anyway. That was who Mom was. A sweet, selfless person who couldn't see the bad in the people she loved. Margaret and George had always measured people by one thing: money. To them, a person's worth was directly tied to their bank account. If you weren't wealthy, you simply didn't matter. I'd seen them brush off neighbors, coworkers, even distant relatives who didn't fit their idea of successful. There was this one time when Mom invited Mrs. Hathaway, an elderly widow from down the street, over for tea. She'd been a kind woman, always bringing baked goods and little gifts for Mom. But when Margaret and George stopped by and saw her sitting there in her worn-out cardigan, Margaret barely acknowledged her presence. George didn't even bother hiding his disdain. Later, Margaret pulled me aside and said, "Why does Mom even talk to people like that? What can they possibly offer her?" It was sickening. And the irony of it all? Their own so-called success was as fragile as glass. Beneath the surface, George and Margaret were drowning in debt. They'd been borrowing money from the bank for years, refinancing their home, maxing out credit cards, whatever it took to keep up appearances. Margaret once let it slip to me after a few too many glasses of wine that they were stretched thin, but she quickly laughed it off, saying, "It's just temporary. George's investments will pay off soon." But they never did. That's the thing about people like Margaret and George. They live for the image, the illusion of wealth, even when it's built on lies. Their fancy cars, their designer clothes, their perfectly manicured lawn, it was all for show. And now, seeing Margaret use Mom's money to keep that illusion alive made me feel sick to my stomach. Mom, who had worked so hard to save every penny after selling her car, deserved so much better than to have her sacrifices thrown away on Margaret's shallow lifestyle. Mom's decline was slow at first. Small things like losing her appetite or needing more rest. But as the months went by, it became harder to ignore. Her energy faded, her voice grew weaker, and some days, it was like the vibrant woman I'd always known was slipping away right before my eyes. I tried to be strong for her, but the weight of everything, taking care of her, managing my own life, and the constant frustration with Margaret, was becoming unbearable. One day, after another tense encounter with Margaret, Laura suggested I try something to clear my head. "Rebecca, you're burning out," she said gently. "You're doing everything for everyone, and it's not sustainable. Take a couple of hours for yourself. Go to that yoga class you've been talking about." I hesitated but finally agreed. Mom was having a quiet day and Margaret was supposed to be around, so I thought, just this once I could step away. I left my phone on silent in my bag, telling myself it would only be for a little while. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, even if it was just for an hour or two. When the class ended, I grabbed my phone and saw the missed calls, 6 from Margaret. My stomach dropped as I fumbled to unlock the screen. Her last voicemail made my blood run cold. "Rebecca, it's Mom," Margaret's voice said, trembling but sharp. "She's gone. I don't know where you were, but you should have been here." I don't even remember how I got home. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled into the house where Margaret was sitting on the couch, her face red and blotchy. "She just stopped breathing," she said, looking up at me. "I was here, but there was nothing I could do." I couldn't speak. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I'd been gone for 2 hours, and I hadn't been there to say goodbye. Mom had died at home, in the little guest house she'd moved into with Margaret by her side. The guilt hit me like a freight train. "You should have been here," Margaret said, her voice cold now. "I don't know why you thought yoga was more important than Mom. She needed you, Rebecca." Her words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she had no right to judge me, not after everything she'd done. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, tears streaming down my face, as the weight of losing Mom settled in. The day of Mom's funeral was cold and gray, the kind of weather that seeped into your bones. Mom had been deeply religious, so it was only fitting that the service was held at her beloved church. The stained glass windows cast soft colors onto the pews as the organ played a somber melody. I sat near the front, clutching a tissue in one hand and a picture of Mom in the other. My heart was heavy, not just with grief, but with the weight of everything that had happened. Margaret and George arrived late, of course, sweeping into the church as if it were a fashion show. Margaret was dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her neck adorned with a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly rent. George, in an expensive-looking suit, walked beside her, carrying an air of smug self-importance. The way they moved, it was like they thought the funeral was about them, not Mom. As they made their way to the front, I caught the whispers. People were glancing at me with judgment in their eyes, leaning toward each other to murmur behind their hands. My stomach twisted, and I tried to focus on the picture of Mom in my lap, but it was impossible not to hear. "Rebecca wasn't even there when Angel passed," one voice whispered. "Margaret said she was off doing yoga," another added, the disdain dripping from their words. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Margaret had made sure to plant that seed in everyone's mind. She wanted them to see me as the selfish daughter, the one who abandoned Mom when she needed me most. And judging by the looks I was getting, it had worked. Margaret slid into the pew next to me, flashing me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You okay, Rebecca?" she whispered, her tone dripping with faux concern. "I know it must be hard, knowing you weren't there for her." I stared straight ahead, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. The priest began to speak, his voice filling the church as he talked about Mom's kindness, her unwavering faith, and her love for her family. I felt tears sting my eyes as he mentioned how devoted she had been to her daughters. If only he knew the truth. As the priest continued his eulogy, his voice grew softer, more intimate, as if he were speaking directly to each of us. "Angel was a remarkable woman," he said, glancing at the congregation. "She loved deeply, forgave endlessly, and carried a quiet strength that inspired those around her. In my final visit with her just days before her passing, she entrusted me with something very personal. A letter." A murmur rippled through the church. My breath hitched. "A letter?" I glanced at Margaret, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. George furrowed his brow, looking confused but not concerned. I, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. "She asked me to read it today," the priest continued, holding up a sealed envelope. "It was her final wish, and she made me promise that I would share her words with all of you." The church fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop as he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. The anticipation was unbearable. My heart pounded as the priest adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. "To everyone gathered here today," he began, his voice steady, "I want to thank you for coming to celebrate my life. I lived a life of love and faith. And though it was not without challenges, I leave this world with gratitude in my heart. However, there is something I must say before I rest. Something that weighs heavily on me and must be brought into the light." I froze. I could feel the tension in the room as everyone leaned in, waiting for what came next. "I have always believed in forgiveness," the priest read, his tone solemn. "But forgiveness does not erase the truth. And the truth is, in my final months, I experienced a betrayal so painful that it nearly broke me. Margaret, my eldest daughter, I trusted you with everything. My care, my home, my finances. But you took advantage of that trust in ways that no mother should ever endure. Gasps echoed through the church. Margaret's face went pale, and she shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. George's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his eyes darting toward the priest. You took the money I had saved from selling my car, money I had set aside for my care, for emergencies. Rebecca, who gave so much of herself to ensure I was never alone, I know that you knew about this, but decided to protect me so that I wouldn't suffer in my final months. God bless you for being such a wonderful child, the priest continued. Margaret, you drained my bank account and what was left of my energy, leaving me with nothing. I knew, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to shame you or cause more pain in my final days, but people need to know who you are. My hands flew to my mouth as tears streamed down my face. She knew. All this time, Mom knew. The guilt, the fear of breaking her heart, it had been for nothing. She had carried that pain herself, silently. The priest's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. The silence in the church was deafening. All eyes turned to Margaret, who sat frozen, her face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. George shifted uncomfortably beside her, his usual smugness replaced with unease. No one said a word, but the weight of judgment in the room was palpable. I didn't move. My tears were flowing freely now, but they weren't just for Mom. They were for the truth she had carried alone, for the strength it must have taken to leave this world with grace despite everything Margaret had done. My chest ached with a mix of grief, relief, and rage. Margaret finally broke the silence. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. She was sick, probably confused. I did everything for her, everything. And this is how she repays me? People around her started to whisper, their faces filled with shock and disdain. George grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she yanked it away. "You don't know what it's like," she continued, her voice louder now, almost desperate. "I was under so much pressure. I needed that money for the house, for both of us." "That's enough, Margaret," the priest said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is not the time to justify your actions. Your mother's words speak for themselves." Margaret glared at him, then at me. Her eyes burned with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I hope you're happy," she spat before storming out of the church, George trailing awkwardly behind her. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut echoed through the sanctuary. I sat there stunned, as people began to murmur around me. Some whispered words of sympathy, while others exchanged looks that said everything they thought about Margaret's outburst. Laura, who had been sitting a few rows behind me, came up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca," she said softly, her voice steady. "Your mom saw you for who you are. She knew you were the one who stood by her, no matter what." I nodded, my throat tight. Mom's letter had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I had spent so much time protecting her, trying to shield her from the truth, and yet she had known all along. And even in her final days, she had chosen to protect me instead. As the service ended and people began to file out, many stopped to offer me condolences, their words laced with a newfound respect. Margaret's mask had finally slipped, and the truth was out. I wasn't sure what would happen next, for her, for George, or for me. But one thing was certain. Mom's voice, even in death, had given me a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I looked at the picture of Mom I had taken from the service. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching it close to my chest. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Mom's love had been bigger than Margaret's betrayal, and in the end, that love was all I needed to carry me forward.